Hello, my dear friends. Welcome to Hauntra. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so that you don't miss any exciting coming up videos. Story 1: The Echoing House. Michael and his wife Sarah moved into an old Victorian house in a quiet countryside. The house was a fixer-upper, bought at a suspiciously low price from a distant relative. Michael noticed how silent the area was, not even the sound of birds. Sarah shrugged off his unease, pointing out that they needed the peace after a stressful city life. While unpacking, Michael found an old journal hidden in a wall cavity. The first page read, "If you hear the echoes, do not answer." Dismissing it as a prank, he tossed it aside. Sarah found the house charming, especially the ornate mirrors in every room. That night, the silence felt oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. While renovating, Michael heard faint whispers echoing through the hallway. Thinking it was Sarah, he followed the sound, but it led him to an empty room. When he returned, Sarah asked why he had called her name earlier. Michael denied doing so, brushing it off as the house settling. Later that evening, they both heard faint laughter coming from the basement. Michael joked it was probably rats, but Sarah looked unnerved. She asked if they should call an exterminator, but Michael wanted to investigate first. They descended into the basement, the flashlight's beam flickering ominously. The laughter stopped abruptly as they reached the bottom. All they found was an empty room with dust-covered shelves. Sarah noticed that one of the ornate mirrors in their bedroom seemed cleaner than the others. She swore she hadn't polished it, and Michael hadn't either. Later, while brushing her hair in front of it, she thought she saw movement behind her. She turned, but nothing was there. Michael laughed it off, blaming her imagination. That night, Sarah had a nightmare of her reflection stepping out of the mirror and strangling her. She woke up screaming, her neck sore as if someone had gripped it. Michael comforted her, saying it was just a dream. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was watching her. The next morning, Michael decided to read more of the journal. It belonged to a man named Edward, who lived in the house decades ago. Edward wrote about hearing echoes and whispers that seemed to mimic his family's voices. "They are not us," one entry read, "but they want to be." Michael felt a chill and shared the journal with Sarah, but she dismissed it as fiction. That evening, Michael heard Sarah calling him from the kitchen. When he went to check, she wasn't there. Moments later, she came downstairs confused, claiming she hadn't called him. Michael's unease deepened. While cleaning the attic, Sarah found a dusty music box that played a haunting tune. She brought it downstairs, and Michael noticed the melody sounded oddly familiar. That night, they both dreamed of a faceless figure standing by their bed, humming the tune. They woke up at the same time, drenched in sweat. "We should leave," Sarah whispered, but Michael insisted they were just tired from the move. As Sarah left for work the next day, Michael stayed home to continue unpacking. Alone, he heard his own voice calling for Sarah, but it was coming from upstairs. Michael discovered a locked room they hadn't noticed before. He forced the door open to find a small space filled with mirrors, each reflecting the room from impossible angles. In one mirror, he saw himself standing still while he moved in reality. He slammed the door shut and called Sarah, but she didn't answer. That night, Sarah noticed a new mirror in their hallway that neither of them had placed there. "It's just an old house," Michael said. But even he wasn't convinced. The echoes in the house became more frequent, often mimicking their voices perfectly. One evening, they heard each other talking in the living room while they were upstairs. They crept down together to find the room empty. Michael grabbed the journal and read aloud, "Do not acknowledge them, or they will grow stronger." Sarah wanted to leave, but Michael suggested hiring a paranormal investigator. Sarah reluctantly agreed, and they planned to call someone the next morning. The investigator, a woman named Claire, arrived with equipment to measure electromagnetic fields and record audio. She immediately felt uneasy, describing the house as heavy. Her recorder picked up whispers neither Sarah nor Michael could hear. "You're not alone here," Claire said, warning them to leave. Michael insisted on staying one more night, determined to uncover the truth. Claire left, promising to analyze her recordings and return the next day. That night, the shadows in the house seemed darker, more oppressive. Michael and Sarah locked themselves in their bedroom, but the whispers came through the walls. Michael felt something brush against his arm but saw nothing. When they looked into the bedroom mirror, their reflections were smiling, even though they weren't. Sarah screamed, throwing a blanket over the mirror. "This house is wrong," she sobbed, begging Michael to leave. The next morning, Michael decided to investigate the basement again. This time, he found a trapdoor hidden beneath the dusty shelves. It led to a narrow tunnel, where he found remnants of burnt candles and a journal similar to the first one. This journal described rituals to trap reflections that had escaped into the house. Michael hurried upstairs, his heart pounding. When Michael emerged, he couldn't find Sarah. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, and her car was still in the driveway. Frantic, he searched every room, calling her name. He heard faint laughter coming from the mirror room and found the door ajar. Inside, one of the mirrors showed Sarah standing motionless, staring at him. He tried to touch the mirror, but his hand passed through it, feeling ice cold. Michael's reflection began talking to him, mimicking his voice perfectly. "You can save her," it said, "but you have to play." The reflection explained that Sarah was trapped in their world and he would need to perform a ritual to free her. Desperate, Michael agreed, following the instructions left in the journals. The house seemed to hum with energy as he prepared the ritual. Michael placed candles and mirrors in a circle, chanting the incantation from the journal. The air grew colder and the whispers became a cacophony. The mirrors vibrated, showing distorted versions of him and Sarah. The music box began playing by itself, the haunting tune echoing eerily. "Almost there," the reflection said, its grin widening unnaturally. A portal-like rift appeared in the center of the circle, revealing a dark, foggy world. Michael saw Sarah's figure in the distance, running toward him. He reached into the rift, but something cold and clawed grabbed his arm. The reflection laughed, saying, "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" The reflection offered a deal. One of them could escape, but only one. Sarah begged Michael to let her go, but he couldn't decide. The house began shaking, the whispers turning into screams. Michael hesitated, knowing he might lose Sarah forever if he made the wrong choice. Michael made the painful decision to push Sarah through the rift, sacrificing himself to the reflection's world. As she fell back into the real world, the rift closed behind her. Sarah screamed, banging on the mirrors, but Michael was gone. The house fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Sarah fled the house, driving until she reached Claire's office. She recounted everything, But Claire warned her that escaping the house didn't mean she was free. "It will try to find you," Claire said, showing Sarah a recording of her own voice echoing in the background of her earlier investigation. Back at her new apartment, Sarah began noticing strange occurrences. The music box reappeared on her shelf, and her reflection occasionally didn't move with her. One night, she heard Michael's voice calling her from the living room. When she looked into the mirror, Michael's reflection was there, smiling. Sarah tried to destroy the mirrors, but every shard still reflected Michael's sinister grin. The whispers returned, louder than before. She realized she couldn't escape the house's curse. It had marked her. Every time she looked into a mirror, she felt herself being pulled closer to it. One night, Sarah's reflection stepped out of the mirror, taking her place. The real Sarah was pulled into the mirror world, screaming as her doppelganger smiled. The new Sarah moved seamlessly, blending into her life. In the empty house, the mirrors shimmered, waiting for their next victim. Story 2. The Silent Lodger. Amara inherited an old boarding house after her grandmother passed away. Strapped for cash, she decided to reopen it, renting rooms to travelers. The house had 9 rooms, but only 8 were listed in the records. The 9th room, at the end of the hallway, had no key and wouldn't open. Amara shrugged it off, thinking it was a storage closet or sealed-off space. On her first night alone in the house, she heard faint knocking from the unlisted room. Dismissing it as her imagination, she went to bed, convincing herself it was just the creaking of an old house. Amara's first guest, a middle-aged man named Mr. Jensen, arrived 2 days later. He seemed nervous, his eyes darting around as he checked in. "This house feels familiar," he muttered. Amara brushed it off, giving him the keys to room 3. That night, she heard the faint knocking again, louder this time. When she checked the hallway, it was empty, but she noticed Mr. Ralph Jensen's door was slightly ajar. She peeked inside but found him sound asleep. Uneasy, she returned to her room. The next day, Mr. Jensen mentioned hearing whispers during the night. "It's an old house," Amara explained, but he seemed unconvinced. She decided to inspect the unlisted room but found no way to open the door. Running her fingers along the wood, she felt a faint chill and pulled her hand back. That evening, a second guest arrived, a young woman named Lily. Amara gave her room 6, trying to shake the eerie feeling about the unlisted room. As Amara was cleaning the hallway, she saw a figure standing near the unlisted room. It was a tall man with his back to her, wearing a dark coat and hat. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, but he didn't respond. When she approached, the hallway was empty. That night, Lily complained of someone knocking on her door at midnight. "When I opened it, no one was there," she said, visibly shaken. The following morning, Amara discovered the door to the unlisted room slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open. Inside was a sparsely furnished room with a bed, a chair, and a small table. On the table lay a ledger covered in dust. When she picked it up, she noticed the last entry was dated 1952. The name Mr. Gallo was scrawled repeatedly across the page, as though written by a trembling hand. Amara felt a presence behind her and spun around, but the room was empty. Mr. Jensen left abruptly, refusing to explain why. "There's something wrong with this place," he muttered as he loaded his bags into his car. Lily stayed, but asked Amara if anyone else had rented the room across from hers. "No," Amara replied, puzzled. "I saw someone standing there last night, just staring at my door," Lily whispered. Amara assured her she was safe, though she didn't believe it herself. Amara decided to investigate the ledger further. The entries dated back to the 1940s, detailing guests who had stayed in the boarding house. One name, Mr. Gallo, appeared repeatedly, but the notes beside it were strange. Checked in, never left. Each entry after his had eerie annotations. He watches. He waits. That night, Amara dreamed of a man standing by her bed, his face obscured by shadow. Lily burst into Amara's room early the next morning, pale and trembling. "I'm leaving," she announced. She explained that she'd seen Mr. Gallo in her room during the night, standing silently by the window. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. She sobbed. Amara tried to convince her to stay, but Lily packed her things and left without another word. The same day Lily left, a quiet man named Thomas arrived. He rented room 5 and barely spoke during check-in. That night, Amara heard loud thuds coming from the unlisted room. Gathering her courage, she approached it, but the door was locked again. As she turned to leave, she heard her name whispered faintly. Amara discovered an antique mirror in the attic. While looking for spare linens, she decided to place it in the hallway for decoration. That night, as she passed the mirror, she saw a shadowy figure standing in the reflection. Turning quickly, she saw nothing but an empty hallway. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple slightly, as though something on the other side was moving. Thomas confided in Amara the next morning, saying he felt someone sit on the edge of his bed during the night. "When I turned on the light, there was an indentation, like someone had just gotten up," he said, his voice shaky. Amara apologized, offering him a refund, but he insisted on staying. That evening, Amara saw the shadowy figure in the mirror again, this time closer. While cleaning the attic, Amara found an old photograph of the boarding house with its former owner and guests standing on the porch. One man stood apart from the others, his face blurred and indistinct. Scribbled on the back were the words, "Do not let him in." Amara's stomach churned as she realized the blurred figure resembled the shadow she'd seen in the mirror. The following day, Thomas didn't come down for breakfast. When Amara knocked on his door, there was no response. Worried, she used a spare key to enter and found the room empty. His belongings were still there, but the bed looked untouched. A cold breeze swept through the room, though the windows were closed. That night, Amara heard footsteps pacing the hallway outside her room. Gathering her courage, she opened the door and saw the shadowy figure standing in front of the unlisted room. "Who are you?" she demanded, but the figure turned and melted into the wall. Amara slammed her door shut, her hands trembling. The next morning, Amara found a note slipped under her door. It read, "He's always been here." The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, and uneven. The ledger had a new entry dated the previous night. Amara, checked in. Panic gripped her as she realized her own name was now part of the haunting records. Desperate for answers, Amara contacted a local historian who knew about the boarding house's past. The historian revealed that a tenant named Mr. Gallo had lived there in 1952, but vanished without a trace. They said he was obsessed with staying forever. The historian said. Amara's blood ran cold when the historian added, "Some say he became part of the house." That night, Amara found the unlisted room wide open, a single chair placed in the center. On the chair was a note, "Sit, and you'll understand." Against her better judgment, she stepped inside and sat. The door slammed shut behind her, and the room was engulfed in darkness. In the pitch-black room, Amara heard Mr. Gallo's voice for the first time. "I protect this house," he whispered, "but it needs a keeper." He offered her a choice, join him or leave, but the house would claim everyone else who entered. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, and the air grew suffocating. Amara chose to leave, unwilling to bind herself to the house. As she fled, she felt invisible hands grabbing at her, pulling her back. She barely made it out, collapsing on the front lawn as the house fell silent. When she looked back, the unlisted room's window glowed faintly, as though someone was watching. Months later, the house was sold to a new owner. Amara saw the listing online: cozy boarding house, perfect for travelers. The unlisted room was still mentioned in the floor plan, but with no further details. Amara shivered, realizing the cycle would begin again. In the house, the mirror reflected not one figure, but two. Story 3. The Midnight Delivery. Ryan, a college dropout struggling with bills, took a job as a delivery driver for a late-night courier service. The job was simple: pick up packages from a warehouse and drop them off at designated locations. No questions, no delays, his boss had warned. Most deliveries were uneventful, but one package caught his attention. It was wrapped in old yellowing paper and smelled faintly of decay. Ryan's first delivery with the strange package was to a house on the outskirts of town. The house was dark, with no signs of life. When he rang the doorbell, a shadowy figure opened the door, took the package without a word, and slammed it shut. As Ryan walked back to his car, he heard a whisper, "Don't look back." Ignoring the warning, he turned around and saw the figure standing at the window, watching him with glowing eyes. The next night, Ryan was given another package, wrapped the same way. This time, the delivery address was an abandoned factory. After dropping off the package, he glanced at his watch and realized an hour had passed without his noticing. He couldn't remember driving back to the warehouse. His boss handed him another package, acting as if nothing was unusual. Ryan decided to ask his boss about the strange packages. "Do your job and keep quiet," his boss snapped. The third delivery was to a motel room. The instructions said not to knock, but to leave the package outside the door. As Ryan placed it down, he heard muffled voices arguing inside, though no one opened the door. He walked away quickly, feeling eyes on his back. Ryan began noticing a black car following him during his deliveries. It stayed a few cars back, always keeping its distance. When he stopped at a gas station, the car pulled into a dark corner of the lot, but didn't approach. As Ryan drove off, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure sitting in the driver's seat, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. One night, Ryan's curiosity got the better of him. He carefully unwrapped one of the packages in the back of his car. Inside was a small, ornate box. As he opened it, he heard a faint voice whisper, "Help me." Startled, he threw the box back into the package and resealed it. For the rest of the night, he felt an oppressive presence in the car, as though someone was sitting in the passenger seat. During a late-night stop at a gas station, Ryan shared his unease with the clerk. The clerk looked alarmed when Ryan mentioned the deliveries. "You're working for them?" he asked, his voice shaking. When Ryan asked what he meant, the clerk muttered, "They're not people. Not anymore." Before Ryan could press further, the clerk locked up the store and disappeared into the back room. Ryan's next delivery was to an address that didn't exist on his GPS. The road led him deep into the woods, ending at a clearing with a single house. The house looked ancient, its windows covered with thick black curtains. When he dropped off the package, the front door opened by itself, but no one was inside. As he turned to leave, he heard faint footsteps behind him, but saw no one. Determined to get answers, Ryan stayed late at the warehouse after his shift. He noticed his boss entering a locked room at the back of the building. Peeking through a crack in the door, Ryan saw a group of people sitting around a table, chanting in an unknown language. On the table lay a package identical to the ones he delivered, but it was pulsating as though alive. On his way home that night, Ryan heard voices coming from the back seat of his car. The whispers grew louder, forming words, "You shouldn't have looked." Panicking, Ryan pulled over and checked the back seat, but it was empty. As he continued driving, he saw shadowy figures darting between the trees along the roadside. Ryan's next delivery was to an upscale apartment complex. When the door opened, he was shocked to see his childhood friend Emily. She looked pale and tired, her eyes hollow. "You need to leave this job," she whispered urgently. Before he could respond, she shoved the package inside and slammed the door. Ryan tried calling her later, but her number was disconnected. At the warehouse, Ryan noticed a man in a black suit collecting unclaimed packages. The man moved stiffly, as if his joints didn't work properly. His face was blank, with no discernible features. When he turned to leave, he seemed to vanish into thin air. Ryan's boss dismissed his questions, saying, "You'll meet him eventually." One delivery took Ryan to an abandoned church in the middle of nowhere. The doors creaked open on their own as he approached, revealing a single lit candle inside. He left the package on the altar, feeling an inexplicable heaviness in the air. As he turned to leave, the candle flickered out, plunging the church into darkness. That night, Ryan dreamt of shadows crawling across his bedroom walls. They whispered his name, urging him to join the ranks. When he woke, he found muddy footprints leading from his front door to his bed. Terrified, he decided to skip his next shift, but his phone buzzed with a message from his boss. "You can't quit." Ryan finally confronted his boss, demanding to know what was going on. "You're part of something bigger," his boss said cryptically. "Deliveries must be made. Lives depend on it." He handed Ryan another package, but this time, it felt cold and heavy as if something inside was moving. Ryan hesitated but took it, feeling trapped. In his mailbox, Ryan found an unsigned letter. It read, "Leave the job now, or you'll never escape. Burn the packages before it's too late." The letter's handwriting matched his mother's, who had been dead for years. Confused and frightened, Ryan decided to deliver the package, but planned to burn the next one. The following night, Ryan lit a fire in an isolated field and tossed the package into the flames. As it burned, a piercing scream echoed through the night. The fire roared unnaturally high, and Ryan saw faces in the flames, screaming in agony. He ran back to his car, vowing never to open or burn another package. Ryan received a package addressed to his own apartment. When he asked his boss about it, he was met with a chilling smile. "It's time," his boss said. The package was heavier than the others, and the whispers inside were louder. Ryan felt sick as he drove home, unsure of what he would find. When Ryan opened the package, he found a small black book inside. The pages were filled with names, including his own. As he read, he realized the book chronicled the lives of everyone who had delivered these packages, all ending with the same word: taken. The last page was blank, waiting for his final entry. Ryan tried to flee, but the shadows caught him before he reached his car. He woke up back at the warehouse, standing beside his boss, now wearing the same blank expression as the package collector. A new driver walked in for his first day, and Ryan handed him the keys, whispering, "Good luck." The cycle had claimed another victim. Story 4. The Forgotten Playground. Mia and her friends, Jake, Ella, and Liam, stumbled upon an overgrown playground during a weekend hike. It was tucked away in a dense forest, hidden from the trail. The swings were rusted, the slide covered in moss, and the merry-go-round creaked in the breeze. A faded sign read, "Cedar Grove Playland," but none of them had ever heard of it before. Despite its eerie state, they decided to explore. Ella unearthed a stuffed bear, its fur matted and one button eye missing. As they left, Mia felt as though someone or something was watching. That night, Mia dreamed of the playground. In her dream, the equipment was new, and children's laughter echoed in the air. She saw a group of kids playing tag, but their faces were blurred. One girl, with pigtails and a red dress, stood by the swings, staring at Mia. When Mia approached, the girl whispered, "Come back and play with us." Mia woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. Curious, Mia researched Cedar Grove Playland but found nothing online. When she asked her grandmother, the old woman froze, her face pale. "That playground closed years ago," she said. "Children went missing there. It's cursed." Mia dismissed the warning as a silly urban legend, but her grandmother insisted, "Stay away from that place." Jake, always the thrill-seeker, suggested they return to the playground at night. "If it's really haunted, we'll see for ourselves," he said with a grin. Ella and Liam were hesitant, but Mia agreed, secretly curious about her dream. They brought flashlights and met at the trailhead after sunset. As they neared the playground, the air grew colder and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. Under the moonlight, the playground looked even more sinister. The swings moved slightly, though there was no wind. Liam shone his flashlight on the merry-go-round and gasped. It was spinning slowly. "Probably the wind," Jake said, though his voice lacked confidence. Mia saw a shadow dart between the trees but told herself it was her imagination. Ella froze as faint laughter echoed through the playground. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The group fell silent, straining to listen. The laughter grew louder, childlike and joyous, but it came from nowhere. Suddenly, the stuffed bear Ella had found earlier appeared on the swing, though she had left it at home. "I'm done," Ella said, backing away. As they turned to leave, Mia saw the girl from her dream standing by the slide. Her red dress looked faded, and her face was still obscured. "Do you see her?" Mia asked, but her friend saw nothing. The girl lifted her hand, pointing toward the woods. Against her better judgment, Mia followed, calling out, "Wait!" The girl led Mia to a small clearing surrounded by dense trees. When Mia stepped into the space, the girl vanished. Her friends caught up, scolding her for wandering off. On the ground, they found a circle of small handprints pressed into the dirt. Liam suggested they leave immediately, but Jake insisted on staying longer. As they returned to the trail, they realized their watches and phones had stopped working. When they finally reached the parking lot, it was nearly dawn. "How is that possible? We were only there an hour," Ella said, panicking. Exhausted and confused, they agreed not to talk about what had happened, at least for now. The next morning, Mia noticed a faint handprint on her wrist, as if a child had grabbed her. It wouldn't wash off, and the skin underneath felt cold. When she mentioned it to Ella, she revealed a similar mark on her ankle. Liam and Jake denied having any marks, but looked uneasy. Mia returned to the playground alone, drawn by an unexplainable urge. As she walked through the forest, the trees seemed to whisper her name. When she reached the playground, the girl in red was waiting. This time, her face was clearer, her eyes were hollow, and her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. "Play with us," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. Mia fled home and searched old newspaper archives. She discovered articles about children who had vanished in the area during the 1960s. Each child had last been seen playing at Cedar Grove Playland. One photo showed a little girl in a red dress. Mia recognized her immediately. Her name was Lily Carter, and she had been missing for over 50 years. When Mia told her friends what she'd learned, Jake suggested they destroy the playground. "If it's cursed, we need to end it," he said. They returned that night with tools, but the playground had changed. The equipment looked new, as it had in Mia's dream, and the air was filled with laughter. Ella screamed when she saw children running between the trees, their faces obscured. As they tried to leave, the trail disappeared, replaced by dense forest. "This wasn't here before," Liam shouted, panicking. They were trapped, the laughter growing louder and more sinister. The swings creaked violently, and the merry-go-round spun at an unnatural speed. The girl in red appeared again, this time closer. "Stay and play," she said, her voice cold and commanding. One by one, Mia's friends began to disappear. Jake was the first, pulled into the woods by unseen hands. Ella vanished near the merry-go-round, her screams abruptly silenced. Liam and Mia clung to each other, terrified. "We need to find a way out," Liam said. But deep down, Mia felt it was hopeless. Mia heard a faint melody, like a nursery rhyme coming from the swings. She recognized it from her childhood, but couldn't remember where she had heard it. "It's how they lure you," Liam said, covering his ears. Despite his warning, Mia found herself humming along, the tune pulling her toward the swings. Liam disappeared as they reached the clearing where the handprints had been. Mia was alone now, surrounded by the echoes of her friends' voices calling her name. She saw Lily standing at the edge of the clearing, holding the stuffed bear. "You should have left," Lily said, her grin widening. "Now you'll never go home." Desperate, Mia begged Lily to let her go. "You can stay with us or bring someone else," Lily said. The ground trembled as shadowy figures emerged from the trees, their faces obscured like the children in Mia's dream. She realized these were the missing kids, forever trapped in the playground. Mia chose to stay, hoping to protect others from the playground's curse. As the shadows closed in, her body grew cold and her vision blurred. She felt herself fading, becoming part of the playground. The last thing she saw was her reflection in the merry-go-round's polished surface. Her face was now hollow and blurred. Months later, hikers discovered the playground, now overgrown once more. A child's voice called from the swings, asking, "Will you play with us?" The hikers laughed nervously, dismissing it as the wind. But as they turned to leave, one of them found a stuffed bear lying on the trail, its button eye glinting in the sunlight. Story 5. The Mirror That Lied. Sarah loved collecting antiques, so when she spotted an old mirror in a dusty corner of a local shop, she couldn't resist. The mirror had an ornate frame, carved with strange symbols she couldn't decipher. "It's one of a kind," the shopkeeper said with a strange smile. Despite a nagging feeling of unease, Sarah bought it and brought it home. Sarah hung the mirror in her bedroom, admiring how it brightened the space. That night, as she brushed her hair in front of it, she noticed something odd. Her reflection wasn't mimicking her movements perfectly. It was a fraction of a second behind. She dismissed it as her imagination, but the unease lingered. The next morning, Sarah woke to find smudges on the mirror, as though someone had pressed their hands against the glass from the inside. She cleaned it and forgot about it until that evening. As she turned off the lights, she saw a shadow moving in the mirror. When she turned around, nothing was there. Sarah started hearing faint whispers whenever she stood near the mirror. At first, the words were indistinct, but they gradually became clearer. "Help me," the voice pleaded. Startled, Sarah asked, "Who's there?" but got no response. That night, she dreamed of a woman trapped inside a glass prison, her face pale and eyes filled with terror. One evening, Sarah returned home to find her bedroom door locked from the inside. She was certain she hadn't locked it. After forcing it open, she saw the mirror lying flat on the floor, though it had been securely hung. The symbols on the frame seemed darker, almost glowing in the dim light. Determined to learn more about the mirror, Sarah returned to the antique shop, but it was closed. A man standing nearby noticed her frustration. "You bought the mirror, didn't you?" he asked gravely. When Sarah nodded, he whispered, "It belonged to a woman who disappeared. They say her soul is trapped inside." Before she could ask more, the man hurried away. The next time Sarah showered, she found a chilling message written in the steam on her bathroom mirror. "Don't trust it." She hadn't written it, and no one else had been in the apartment. She glanced at the antique mirror, which now seemed darker, the symbols pulsating faintly. Sarah noticed her reflection behaving more strangely each day. One night, as she stared into the mirror, her reflection didn't move at all. It just smiled. Sarah backed away, but the reflection remained still, its grin widening unnaturally. Suddenly, it moved on its own, pressing its hand against the glass as if trying to break through. Terrified, Sarah spent hours online researching cursed objects. She found stories about mirrors acting as gateways to other realms, ghouls trapping souls within them. One story mentioned symbols similar to those on her mirror, describing them as seals to bind something inside. Sarah realized she had to get rid of it, but fear held her back. Sarah tried to move the mirror out of her apartment, but it was unnaturally heavy, almost as if it didn't want to leave. When she finally managed to drag it to the curb, she heard a loud crash inside her apartment. Rushing back in, she found the mirror somehow back on her bedroom wall, perfectly intact. That night, Sarah woke to the sound of faint tapping. The noise was coming from the mirror. As she watched in horror, a pale hand emerged from the glass, followed by a face, the woman from her dreams. "You need to free me," the woman whispered before being yanked back into the mirror by shadowy hands. Desperate, Sarah visited a local psychic. The woman gasped when Sarah described the mirror. "It's a prison," the psychic said. "Someone or something is trapped inside, and breaking the seals could release it. But be warned, what's inside may not be what it seems." Sarah left, more confused and frightened than ever. That evening, Sarah's reflection spoke to her for the first time. "Help me, and I'll leave you alone," it said, its voice calm but insistent. "Break the seals on the frame." Sarah hesitated, remembering the psychic's warning. "How can I trust you?" she asked. The reflection's smile returned, wider than ever. "You have no choice." Against her better judgment, Sarah decided to break one of the symbols. Using a knife, she scratched through the first carving. The moment it was destroyed, the room grew icy cold, and the whispers intensified. The reflection laughed, a low, guttural sound that wasn't human. "One down," it said ominously. Over the next few days, Sarah noticed dark shadows moving through her apartment. They darted across the walls and ceilings, disappearing whenever she turned on the lights. The reflection seemed more powerful now, its movements more independent. Sarah realized she had made a terrible mistake. Determined to stop the nightmare, Sarah returned to the psychic, who revealed more about the mirror's history. It had been created by a sorcerer who trapped a malevolent spirit inside, sealing it with the symbols. If you break all the seals, the spirit will be free, the psychic warned, and it won't spare you. Terrified but determined, Sarah decided to destroy the second seal, hoping to learn more about the spirit's intentions. As she scratched it off, the mirror cracked slightly, and a deep, inhuman growl echoed through the room. The shadows grew bolder, and Sarah began hearing her name whispered from the darkness. One night, Sarah's reflection revealed its true form, a gaunt, skeletal figure with hollow eyes and jagged teeth. "You're almost there," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. Sarah realized the spirit had been manipulating her all along. It wasn't seeking freedom, it was seeking revenge. Panicking, Sarah tried to repair the seals, but it was too late. The symbols had faded entirely, and the mirror was vibrating violently. The spirit's laughter filled the room as the glass shattered, releasing a black mist that enveloped Sarah. "Thank you," the spirit whispered as the darkness consumed her. Weeks later, the antique shop reopened under new management. The mirror, now fully restored, sat in the window display. A young couple entered, admiring its craftsmanship. "It's one of a kind," the shopkeeper said with a strange smile, handing them a receipt as the mirror was carried away to its next victim. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.